Imagine this. You wake up and they haven't texted you back. Your stomach drops. Not because something's wrong, but because they didn't validate you today. You say it's love, but if you're honest, you're not obsessed with them. You're obsessed with what they make you feel: wanted, chosen, seen. But here's the bitter truth no one tells you. You're not in love. You're addicted to the feeling of being wanted. Because when you've gone your whole life starving for affection, even breadcrumbs feel like a feast. There is a difference, vast, devastating, and almost invisible, between loving someone and needing them to love you so that you can feel like you exist. And that difference is the one most people spend their entire lives failing to see. Because it's easy to mistake the rush of being noticed, the warmth of being desired, the dizzying high of feeling chosen, for the quiet, enduring, almost unremarkable presence of real love. But real love isn't a performance, and it certainly isn't a drug. Validation, on the other hand, is intoxicating precisely because it mimics the feeling of love while feeding the very emptiness that keeps you trapped. You're not in love. You're high on the sensation of finally feeling seen in a world that taught you, from the very beginning, that you needed to earn your place in someone else's heart. Think back. How many times have you said, "I love how they make me feel"? That one sentence, repeated in songs, movies, therapy sessions, and journal pages, reveals the entire truth of your addiction. You don't love them. You love how their gaze soothes your insecurities, how their attention quiets your inner critic, how their presence fills the void you've been carrying like a second skin since childhood. It's not about them. It's about how, when they look at you a certain way, it feels like you finally exist. And that's not love. That's a survival mechanism you've mistaken for romance. Let's step back from the personal and look at a woman who was worshipped by the world yet died alone and undone by the very thing she chased. Marilyn Monroe. She was the embodiment of desire, the icon of feminine beauty, the woman whose smile lit up rooms and movie screens. But beneath the red lipstick and the camera flashes lived a girl who had been passed from foster home to foster home, whose heart ached for consistent affection, whose worth had always been determined by how desirable others found her. And that's the tragedy, because like so many of us, she confused being wanted with being loved. She surrounded herself with men who admired her, chased her, obsessed over her, but few ever truly saw her, and fewer still offered the kind of love that remains when the glamour fades and the performance ends. What happened to Marilyn is what happens to all of us when we chase validation instead of love. We begin to shape ourselves into the version we think will be loved the most. We laugh at the right moments, suppress the parts of us that might be too much, stay quiet when we want to scream, nod when we want to say no, and we call this compatibility. But it's not connection. It's emotional self-erasure. And in doing so, we fall in love with the version of ourselves that we believe is finally worthy. The version that's not too needy, not too broken, not too emotional, not too real. And we project our craving for acceptance onto whoever happens to mirror it back, even if just for a moment, even if they're hollow inside, even if they'll vanish the second we stop performing. You think you want them, but what you actually want is to feel like you're finally enough. And that hunger is what keeps you running in circles, chasing emotionally unavailable people, misreading signals and calling the pain passion. Because when you've been starving for love, even breadcrumbs will feel like a feast. But no matter how much attention you receive, it will never satisfy the part of you that still believes you need to earn your right to be loved. That's the cruel truth of validation. It gives temporary relief, not healing. You scroll through your old messages. You wait for them to text. You replay the compliments. You count the minutes, analyze the tone, read between words that were never written. Because it's not about them anymore. It's about preserving that fleeting moment when, for just a second, you felt wanted. But the cost is steep. You start to lose your own voice. You forget what you actually want. You begin to tolerate mistreatment because your addiction to being wanted outweighs your sense of self-respect. And love, real love, requires presence, not performance. Truth, not illusion. Mutuality, not obsession. So ask yourself, would you still want them if they stopped making you feel special? Would you still love them if their silence didn't hurt you? Because if your answer is no, then you don't love them. You love the reflection they offer, the illusion of being good enough, wanted enough, valuable enough. Love is not a mirror for your wounds. It's not a mask to hide your fear of being forgotten. Love does not say, you matter because I see you. Love says, you matter even when I don't. And that kind of love only begins when you stop chasing people who temporarily fill the void and begin healing the part of you that created it in the first place. So many of us confuse intimacy with intensity, not because we're naive, but because we were never taught what real closeness actually feels like when it's safe, steady, and unprovoked by fear. We were raised in a world that romanticized chaos. We saw it in movies, read it in novels, watched it play out in our homes. That push and pull, hot and cold, tear you down, then build you up kind of dynamic that made our hearts race and our stomachs twist. We called that passion. We called that love. But what if the butterflies in your stomach are really just your nervous system bracing for impact? What if the spark you chase is just your trauma, remembering what it feels like to be anxious and alive at the same time? You think you found the one, but all you've really found is someone who knows how to activate your wounds with perfect precision. Because what you call chemistry may actually be familiarity, a familiar pain, a familiar absence, a familiar inconsistency that reminds you of a parent who only loved you when you were pleasing, quiet, impressive. You meet someone new. They say something kind. They look at you a certain way. And before you even know their last name, you've already imagined a future, rehearsed conversations in your head, projected your dreams, and plastered over their red flags with your own need to feel chosen. That's not love. That's fantasy management. It's not about who they are. It's about who you need them to be and what version of yourself you think you can become around them to finally feel like you're enough. You latch onto the idea of them, not the reality. You don't know their true self, their flaws, their fears, their selfishness, or their limits. You only know how you feel when they say your name. And that becomes the drug, the version of yourself that suddenly feels worthy, seen, desired, not invisible. It's not them you're clinging to. It's the feeling they give you when they look at you like you matter. It's the fantasy you built in your head because the reality was never strong enough to hold your hopes. That is not intimacy. That is dependency wrapped in dopamine. And yet, we chase it relentlessly, like Anna Karenina rushing back to a love that unraveled her life, like Romeo and Juliet, whose identities disappeared the moment they believed their longing made them real. We romanticize the fall. We worship the ache. We crave the cliff edge because it makes the ground feel too safe. But let's be honest. Real intimacy is often quiet, even awkward. It's built slowly, with brutal honesty and gentle presence. It isn't fireworks. It's the moment someone sees your flaws and stays. It's the decision to stop pretending. It's choosing to be known, not adored. And that terrifies most people. Because when you've only known love through performance, the idea of being loved as you are feels foreign, almost offensive. So you return to the ones who make you perform, the ones who leave just enough space for your anxiety to grow roots, the ones who text just enough to keep you hooked, but never enough to feel secure. That's not intimacy, that's emotional gambling. And every time you bet, you lose a little more of yourself in hopes that this time the house won't win. But it always does. You say you want closeness, yet you run from anyone who offers it gently. You say you want connection, but you only chase those who withhold it. Because in your mind, if it doesn't hurt, it can't be real. But love that feels like relief instead of anxiety, that's the kind that heals. And until you unlearn the addiction to intensity, you'll keep calling emotional hunger chemistry and trauma reenactment soulmate energy. You can't build a future with someone you only know in fantasy. You can't feel safe with someone whose affection you're always trying to earn. And you can't keep calling it love just because it makes you feel alive. Because sometimes what makes you feel alive is just your body screaming for the stability it never had. There are moments in life when you meet someone and it feels like lightning, like your souls have known each other forever, like time bends when they speak your name. It's intoxicating, overwhelming, beautiful, but also maybe dangerous. Because what you think is destiny might just be familiarity wearing a different face, and the deep pull you feel towards someone doesn't always come from a place of wholeness. Sometimes it comes from a wound that never got to close. It's a terrifying idea to confront, but a necessary one. That many of the relationships we call deep, spiritual, unforgettable, are simply reenactments of our unresolved trauma. They don't come to teach us love. They come to show us what we still haven't healed. You meet someone who's unpredictable, and instead of walking away, you lean in. You feel seen when they're present and devastated when they vanish. You confuse that push and pull, those high highs and low lows, for passion. But it's not passion, it's survival instinct. And your body recognizes the rhythm because it's been here before. It felt like this when you were a child, trying to be good enough for someone's affection, trying to decode silence, trying to predict moods, trying to earn a love that should have been freely given. Now you're an adult, but the child inside you is still doing the choosing. And so you gravitate toward the emotionally unavailable, the distant, the inconsistent. Not because you want pain, but because pain feels familiar, and what is familiar often feels safe, even when it's not. There's a name for this. It's called a trauma bond. It's when your nervous system ties itself to someone who both soothes and wounds you, someone who triggers your deepest fears, but also calms them temporarily. It's the cycle that keeps you stuck, the craving, the withdrawal, the relief, the chaos. And the more intense it is, the more convinced you become that it must be love. But love doesn't feel like obsession. Love doesn't come with a constant fear of abandonment. Love doesn't ask you to shrink, beg, or bleed just to keep it alive. Let's look at Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, two artists whose love was legendary and destructive. Their connection was fierce, unbreakable in some sense, but not healing. Their marriage was a battlefield of infidelities, emotional volatility, and unbearable longing. They couldn't live without each other, but they couldn't live peacefully with each other either. What bound them wasn't always love. It was pain, magnetism, shared brokenness. And they called it art, they called it passion, but perhaps most truthfully, it was a mirror. They mirrored each other's chaos. And sometimes the people we feel the deepest connection with are not our soulmates. They are just the clearest reflection of our wounds. So many of us mistake the emotional roller coaster for depth. We think intensity equals truth. But the truth is, trauma bonds can feel like home because they replicate the emotional landscape we were raised in. You feel anxious, you overfunction, you feel ignored, you chase, you feel unworthy, you try harder, and that dance becomes your definition of love. But if love feels like constantly trying to prove your worth, it's not love. It's an addiction to approval rooted in childhood neglect. You'll know it's a trauma bond when the connection feels too big too fast, when logic disappears, when red flags are justified in the name of passion, when you feel euphoric one moment and invisible the next. You'll defend it by saying, they understand me like no one else. But often what they understand is not you, it's your pain, because they carry the same one. You don't need to find someone who fits your broken pieces. You need to become whole enough to stop building homes out of your hurt. And here's the thing, the more healed you become, the less interested you are in intense connections that lack consistency. The less you romanticize people who make you feel anxious. The less you mistake emotional chaos for soul alignment. The less you crave someone who leaves you starving and calls it passion. Because you realize you were never meant to love from your trauma. You were meant to love from your truth. And the truth is, someone who loves you will not ignite your wounds. They will protect them. They won't make you question your worth. They will reflect it back to you. They won't make you feel high. They'll help you feel whole. There's a pattern you've probably noticed, but couldn't name. You fall hardest for the ones who give the least, the ones who are mysterious, emotionally unavailable, slightly distant, the ones who don't reply fast, who always have you guessing, who never fully let you in, but never fully let you go either. And somehow, that makes you want them even more. It's a cruel trick of the psyche. The less they give you, the more you crave them. But it's not because they're more valuable. It's because their absence activates something inside of you. A deep, ancient wound that whispers, maybe if I try harder, I'll finally be enough. This isn't about them. It never was. This is about how your nervous system was trained to believe that love is something you have to earn, that affection is a reward you get after proving your value. That consistency is a luxury you weren't meant to have. When someone gives freely, you question it. When someone withholds, you chase it. Because somewhere along the way, you learn that love is a currency, one that requires constant effort, constant performance, and constant sacrifice. And so you fall for the one who mirrors that pattern, not because they're good for you, but because they feel familiar. They remind you of the parent who praised you only when you succeeded, the caregiver who made you feel like love had conditions. The early relationship that taught you silence was a test, and your job was to pass it by being perfect. You crave what you never received, and you overvalue what is withheld, not because it's right, but because your body is still trying to rewrite the story it never got to finish. And that story sounds like this. If I can just get them to love me, maybe I'll finally be lovable. This is the blueprint of what psychologists call anxious attachment. It means you don't just want love, you need proof of it, constantly. And when it's absent, you panic, not because the other person is so special, but because your identity feels at risk. Now let's look at a figure from history who embodied this loop over and over again. Princess Diana. The world adored her. But inside her marriage, she was met with coldness, inconsistency, emotional absence. She tried harder. She gave more. But the more she gave, the more she lost herself. She once said in an interview, "There were three of us in this marriage," referring to Charles's ongoing love for Camilla. And even with the entire world watching her, she couldn't get the one person she wanted most to give her what she craved. Certainty. That is the core of the addiction. We want to be wanted by the ones who don't want us back because it feels like justice, like redemption, like finally proving to our younger selves that we are worthy of being chosen, even by the ones who refuse to see us. But here's the brutal truth. Every time you chase someone who withholds love, you abandon the part of you that needs protection. You become the one who breaks your own heart again and again by handing it to people who treat it like a negotiation. You think, if they finally choose me, I'll feel whole. But wholeness doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from no longer needing to be. Ask yourself this: why do you stay in situations that leave you anxious, waiting, overanalyzing, walking on eggshells? Why do you tolerate being half-loved when your heart is capable of so much more? Why do you feel more alive around the people who make you feel invisible? The answer is simple but not easy, because the chaos feels like home, and the pain feels like proof that you're alive. But the cost of chasing people who withhold isn't just heartbreak, it's self-abandonment. It's eroding your standards until you forget you had them. It's shrinking yourself to fit someone else's lack of emotional availability. And here's the secret nobody wants to admit. People who truly see you, value you, and give to you consistently, at first they might seem boring, not because they are, but because they don't activate your wounds. They don't trigger your panic. They don't make you fight for scraps of affection. They offer you something you're not used to: peace. And when peace feels foreign, chaos will always look like passion. So you keep chasing fire until one day you realize you've burned through every part of yourself that believed you were only lovable when you were proving it. The healing begins when you stop asking others to want you and start asking why you keep wanting those who don't. If you've made it this far, there's something in you, quiet, trembling, but alive, that already knows the truth, that what you've been calling love was never love at all. It was a negotiation with your self-worth, a constant audition for the role of enough, a desperate attempt to feel whole by being wanted by people who couldn't even love themselves. And it's not your fault. How could it be? When your earliest understanding of love came wrapped in condition, silence, withdrawal, or performance, how could you possibly recognize the real thing when it finally came along? You weren't taught how to receive love. You were trained how to earn it. And that training cost you your peace, your dignity, your sense of home inside your own body. But it doesn't have to keep costing you. There is a version of you, still buried beneath the fear and the patterns, that no longer needs to be wanted to feel valuable. A version of you that doesn't need to chase, to perform, to shrink or beg just to be seen. A version of you that doesn't mistake silence for suspense or confusion for chemistry. A version that sees the slow, steady love that's been knocking, softly, patiently, on the door you keep locked with old trauma. You say you want real love? Then stop choosing people who only validate your worst beliefs about yourself. Stop calling it fate when someone makes you feel anxious and small and desperate for crumbs. Stop handing your heart to people who don't have the hands to hold it. Because the truth is brutal, but freeing. The feeling of being wanted is seductive, but it is not the same as being loved. Being wanted is about how you serve them. Being loved is about how they protect you, even from yourself. Being wanted will make you feel euphoric. Being loved will make you feel safe. Being wanted ends the moment you stop performing. But love sees you in the quiet. Love stays. You are not hard to love. You were just addicted to the wrong definition of it. You were not too much. You were just with people who could never hold depth. You were not unworthy. You were simply trying to find yourself in the gaze of those who couldn't see beyond their own reflection. And now, you don't need them to see you. Because for the first time, maybe, just maybe, you're starting to see yourself. And that's where the healing begins. Not when they want you, but when you no longer need them to.